I'm Brian, 24 years old, and I've been with Sarah for 2 years now. We met during college, and at first it was just one of those things, casual. But somewhere along the way, she became the center of my world. And in all honesty, it was when she first smiled at me that I knew she was someone special. We both loved the same music, had the same sense of humor, and surprisingly, we even liked the same weird little things, like random facts about the universe. Our first year together was a dream, and after that, I couldn't imagine a life without her. And so, here I am, preparing to ask the question. The big one. It felt like the right time. We were steady, comfortable, and I was sure, more than sure. I was ready to take the next step. Now looking back at the 2 years we've spent together, everything's been perfect. There were the usual bumps, sure, but nothing that we couldn't work through. She made me want to be a better man, to give her the life she deserves. I remember sitting at our usual cafe, the one near the park, watching the birds and listening to the city buzz around us. She had that look in her eyes, the one that always made me feel like I was home. I knew then that it was time to do something crazy, something that would change everything. And as my heart raced, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the small, velvet box. "Sarah," I said, my voice a little shakier than I expected. "You're everything I ever wanted. Will you marry me?" Her eyes widened, her lips parted in shock. I held my breath, but the moment felt suspended, timeless. Would she say yes? Or would she need time to think about it? I've always been the kind of guy who likes to keep things simple. I grew up in a small town just a few hours from the city. My parents were pretty down-to-earth, hardworking folks. My dad worked in construction and my mom was a nurse. They taught me the value of hard work and the importance of family. And I guess that's what shaped me into who I am today. After high school, I didn't have any grand plans, honestly. I just knew I wanted to do something that felt meaningful, something I could be proud of. So, I ended up studying business at the local college. It wasn't the most exciting choice, but I figured it would open doors, and it did. I worked hard through those years, juggling studies and part-time jobs to make ends meet. I remember late nights studying for exams and having to skip out on some social things, but it paid off. By the time I graduated, I had a solid foundation to build my career. Now, I work at a tech startup. It's not the dream job, but it's a good job, and I'm learning every day. The hours can be long, but the work is challenging, and I enjoy that. I've moved up a little in the company, and I can see myself growing even more as I gain experience. Plus, my boss is a good guy. He's always been supportive of me and encouraged me to keep pushing forward. But honestly, no matter how successful I am at work, none of it would mean as much if I didn't have Sarah by my side. She's the one who makes everything feel right. And thinking about that, how much she means to me, how much she's made me grow as a person, makes me more certain than ever that I'm ready for the next step. We've been through a lot together in the 2 years we've been dating. I'm not a huge believer in fate, but I do believe that sometimes things fall into place at the right time. And this feels like that moment. Brian had always known how to make Sarah smile, but this time, he wanted to do something special. After I proposed, I immediately started thinking about what kind of honeymoon I wanted to give her. I'd been working hard, saving up, and I thought to myself, why not splurge a little? Why not give her an experience that we would both remember for the rest of our lives? I had always wanted to do something different, something beyond the typical beach resort or cabin in the mountains. I wanted an adventure, something big. And then it hit me, a cruise. Not just any cruise, but a luxurious 2-week voyage across the Pacific Ocean on one of those massive liners. The kind where you don't even have to leave your cabin to feel like you're on top of the world. It would be the perfect way to celebrate our new life together. The tickets weren't cheap, $5,000 per person, but this was our honeymoon, and I was willing to make it happen. I could already picture Sarah's face when I told her. It was going to be perfect. I didn't tell her right away, though. I wanted to make it a surprise. I spent the next few days making arrangements, researching the ship's itinerary, booking our excursions on the islands we would stop at, and picking out the best cabin with a balcony so we could watch the sun set over the ocean every night. Finally, the day came. We were having dinner together at her favorite restaurant. She was so excited about the wedding plans, but I could tell she was starting to wonder about our honeymoon. "So," she said, taking a sip of her wine, "have you decided where we're going yet?" I grinned and leaned in. "I thought I'd let you in on a little secret," I said, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper from my jacket pocket. I handed it to her. She looked at me with wide eyes as she opened the envelope. Her expression changed from curiosity to shock, then to sheer excitement. I could see her lips trembling with joy. "Wait, what? A cruise? To the Pacific? For 2 weeks?" She didn't even finish reading the rest before jumping up from her seat and throwing her arms around me. "Oh my God, Brian! This is amazing! I can't believe you did this. I've always wanted to go on a cruise, but I never thought we'd be able to afford it." I smiled, holding her tightly. I wanted it to be perfect. "We deserve it. This is just the beginning of everything." She pulled back, still beaming, and kissed me. "I love you. I can't believe this is happening." We spent the rest of the evening talking excitedly about all the places we'd visit, the things we'd do, and how incredible it would be to spend 2 weeks away from everything, just the two of us, sailing across the Pacific. The anticipation made everything feel even more exciting. Our honeymoon was going to be everything we'd dreamed of and more. After months of preparation, the day we had been waiting for finally arrived. We stepped onto the liner with wide eyes, both of us feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The ship was absolutely enormous, gleaming under the sun. And as we boarded, the crew greeted us with friendly smiles and champagne. The atmosphere was luxurious and filled with the hum of excitement from other passengers. We made our way to our cabin, and I couldn't help but smile at the look on Sarah's face when she saw the spacious room with a balcony that offered a panoramic view of the ocean. It was exactly what I had hoped for, something special to start our adventure. After settling in and unpacking, we decided to explore the ship. We strolled along the sun-drenched decks, taking in the beauty of the vast ocean stretching out in every direction. The endless blue was mesmerizing, and I could already feel myself unwinding in the peace of it all. There were pools, a spa, a few boutiques, and even a rooftop bar. We couldn't help but be amazed at how much there was to do. For lunch, we went to one of the ship's open-air dining areas, where we were treated to an incredible spread. Fresh seafood, perfectly grilled steaks, vibrant salads, and a variety of desserts that seemed to melt in your mouth. We sat by the railing, looking out at the water as we ate, feeling like we were in a world all our own. The gentle sway of the ship made it feel as though we were gliding through an endless sea of calm. After lunch, we decided to take a tour of the ship. We explored the grand ballroom, the multiple restaurants, and the entertainment areas. There was a theater where we would later enjoy Broadway-style shows, and a casino that seemed to glitter in the dim light. Everywhere we went, there was something new to discover, and it was impossible not to feel like we were on a floating paradise. We spent the rest of the afternoon lounging by the pool, taking in the sun and chatting about everything and nothing. The endless ocean stretched out before us, and I couldn't help but feel like this was the perfect getaway. We were truly escaping the everyday hustle, just the two of us. As evening approached, we got ready for dinner. The dining room was elegant, with white tablecloths, candlelight, and waiters in crisp uniforms. The menu was exquisite, and we both felt a little fancy as we ordered multiple courses, sushi to start, followed by lobster bisque, filet mignon, and a decadent chocolate mousse for dessert. We talked about our plans for the cruise, the places we wanted to see, and how lucky we were to have this time together. After dinner, we went up to the rooftop bar to catch the sunset. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of pink and orange, and the ocean sparkled under the fading light. We raised our glasses to the beginning of a new chapter, to us, to the adventure ahead. It was hard to believe this was just the beginning. 2 weeks stretched out ahead of us, full of possibility. Later, We watched a performance in the theater. It was a Broadway revue, and the show was spectacular, with stunning costumes and vibrant dance numbers. We laughed and clapped, enjoying the entertainment as the night went on. As we made our way back to the cabin, the ship's lights twinkling in the distance, we knew this was going to be the trip of a lifetime. That first day was everything I had hoped for and more. There was something magical about being on that ship, surrounded by the vast ocean, with nothing but the gentle rocking of the boat and the promise of endless adventures ahead. I could already tell that this was the start of something special. And as Sarah and I settled into bed, the sounds of the ocean lulling us to sleep, I knew we were in for the perfect honeymoon. The next morning, we woke up to the soft sound of the ocean waves crashing against the ship's hull. The gentle rocking of the liner made it feel like we were drifting in a serene dream. The sun had just risen, casting a golden glow across the endless expanse of water. We pulled back the curtains and stepped out onto our balcony. The sight was breathtaking, an unbroken stretch of blue, with the ship cutting through the water like a sleek arrow. After a light breakfast in the cabin, croissants, fresh fruit, and strong coffee, we decided to check out one of the ship's many excursions. The day's stop was a small, picturesque island that we would explore by foot. We were both excited, eager to see more of the world around us. The island was known for its lush forests and pristine beaches. As we disembarked from the ship, a warm breeze greeted us, and the smell of salty sea air mixed with the sweet fragrance of tropical flowers. We joined a small guided tour, but it wasn't long before we strayed from the group to explore on our own. The island was stunning, with towering trees and vibrant plants at every turn. The jungle sounds were alive, and the colors of the flora were so vivid that they seemed almost unreal. We found a secluded spot on the beach and spent some time walking along the shoreline, our feet sinking into the soft, white sand. The water was crystal clear, and as we waded into it, the coolness was a refreshing contrast to the heat of the sun. We spent a few hours on the island, just wandering, taking photos, and basking in the beauty of it all. The peaceful atmosphere made it feel like time had slowed down. We had no rush, no deadlines, just the endless ocean around us and each other. It was hard not to feel a sense of wonder, to realize that we were in this perfect moment together. After returning to the ship, we decided to enjoy a leisurely afternoon. The sun was still high, so we lounged by the pool, sipping on cocktails and relaxing in the warm air. The ship's pool area was like a paradise, with cabanas offering shade, plush lounge chairs, and an array of refreshing drinks and snacks available at the bar. I was starting to feel like we were living in a dream, where all of our worries and responsibilities had melted away. Later, we enjoyed a spa treatment, something we had been looking forward to. We both opted for a couple's massage, and as the skilled hands worked out the tension in our muscles, we both felt completely rejuvenated. There was something about the tranquility of the moment, the sound of gentle music, and the deep relaxation that made it feel like we were in a completely different world. That evening, we attended a formal dinner. The ship's dining room had a grand, sophisticated atmosphere, and it was the perfect way to unwind after the day's activities. We dressed in our finest clothes, and it felt like we were living in a world of elegance and luxury. The food was exquisite once again, and we paired our meal with a bottle of wine recommended by the sommelier. We clinked our glasses and toasted to the start of our new life together. After dinner, we attended a comedy show at the ship's theater. The performance had us both laughing until our sides hurt. The entertainment on board was truly top-notch. Afterward, we went out on deck to watch the stars. The sky was so clear that we could see thousands of stars twinkling overhead. It was surreal, sitting there together, wrapped in a blanket of silence and beauty. As we turned in for the night, I couldn't help but feel incredibly grateful for everything. The trip was already more than I could have hoped for, and we still had days ahead of us to explore and experience new things. This was our honeymoon, and it felt like it had only just begun. After 2 days of perfect bliss, The mood on the ship shifted suddenly. It started with a deep, resonating rumble from the depths of the ocean. At first I thought it was the ship itself creaking, maybe from the weight of the waves, but then it came again, louder and more intense. The sound seemed to echo through the entire ship, a bone-chilling groan that rattled the windows and sent a shiver down my spine. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard before, almost like a growl from the deep, an ancient force pushing against the surface of the sea. The crew seemed calm at first, but the passengers were visibly shaken. People looked at each other in confusion and concern, murmuring to themselves. I could see it in my wife's eyes, the same fear that was beginning to creep into my own heart. The hum of uncertainty filled the air as the ship seemed to tremble with the eerie noise. Soon after, the captain's voice came over the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," he said, his tone trying to reassure the crowd. "What you're hearing is a natural phenomenon. It's just the shifting of tectonic plates deep in the ocean. The sound you're hearing is merely the echo of the water as it moves along the fault lines. There's nothing to worry about. Everything is under control." While his words were meant to soothe, they did little to ease the unease that was sweeping across the ship. The idea of tectonic plates shifting beneath us was unsettling. But what really unsettled everyone was the sheer intensity of the sound. It felt unnatural, like something from a nightmare. The deep, hollow resonance seemed to reach into your very bones, as if the ocean itself were alive, groaning and stretching beneath us. Despite the captain's reassurance, the mood on board changed. There were hushed conversations in the dining room, nervous glances exchanged on the deck, and even the usual cheerful staff seemed a little more reserved. People avoided the ocean's edge, and some returned to their cabins early. My wife squeezed my hand tighter, her eyes wide with concern. I could feel the tension building between us, both of us trying to make sense of what we had just heard. For the next few hours, the sound faded, but it was never truly gone. It was as though the ocean had an unspoken warning to deliver, and though it wasn't as loud, the eerie vibrations seemed to linger in the air. I tried to keep calm, telling myself it was nothing more than the captain's explanation, that the ocean was just shifting, settling. But deep down, something told me there was more to it. The world felt a little off-kilter now, like we were being watched by something far older and deeper than the sea itself. By nightfall, the ship's usual activities had returned to normal, but there was a tension in the air. Even the stars seemed to dim slightly, as if they, too, had been affected by whatever had stirred in the deep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Whatever had caused that sound, it felt like it wasn't just nature at work. It felt like a warning, an omen. Something was waiting beneath the waves, and it had caught our attention. I glanced at my wife, still trying to act normal for her sake. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, what if this wasn't just a natural phenomenon? What if there was something more to those sounds? And what if, somehow, they were calling us, calling me and everyone on this ship closer to the edge of the unknown? As the days passed, the tension that followed the strange sound began to settle, but it was never fully gone. The ship continued its journey across the vast expanse of the Pacific, but there was a lingering unease, as if the ocean itself held its breath. People tried to go about their business, attending the dinners and shows, lounging by the pool, and taking in the breathtaking views of the endless blue horizon. But the eerie feeling that had been cast over the ship refused to dissipate completely. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every creak and groan of the ship seemed amplified in my mind. Every ripple in the water, every strange noise in the distance made my heart race. My wife, though she tried to stay optimistic, seemed quieter than usual, and I could see the unease in her eyes when she glanced out at the ocean, as if she, too, felt the weight of something unseen pressing in around us. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in fiery oranges and reds, the strange sound returned. It wasn't as loud as the first time, but it was unmistakable. A low, rumbling growl, reverberating through the ship, sending shivers down my spine. This time, it was followed by a strange silence, an unnatural stillness, as if the entire world had momentarily frozen. The waves stopped their usual rhythm, and the air itself seemed to hum with a kind of tension. People froze, all eyes turning to the horizon, where the ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. The staff tried to remain calm, offering polite smiles, but even they couldn't hide the discomfort in their eyes. A few passengers started to murmur nervously among themselves, their whispers rising into an anxious hum. I walked out onto the deck with my wife, hoping the fresh air would help clear my mind. The evening air was crisp, the stars beginning to appear, their light flickering softly in the dark sky. But as we stood there, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There in the distance, just on the edge of the horizon, there was a shape, a shadow in the water, large and moving against the current. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or maybe a passing boat, but the shape didn't make sense. It didn't move like a boat, and it didn't appear to be anything I'd seen before. I pointed it out to my wife, who squinted into the distance. "What is that?" she asked, her voice tense, her hand gripping mine. I could hear the fear in her voice, despite her attempt to sound calm. "I don't know," I answered, my heart racing. "Maybe it's just a ship or a whale. But I don't know, it doesn't look right." The shape lingered, moving slowly, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished beneath the waves. We both stood there in stunned silence, staring at the spot where it had been, unsure of what we had just seen. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow and the sound that had followed it. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Had we wandered into some kind of unknown territory? Was there something in the ocean, something ancient and terrifying, watching us from beneath the waves? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shape moving beneath the surface, waiting for us to get closer. The sound from the ocean kept echoing in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever had made that sound, wasn't just a natural occurrence. It was something that wanted us to know it was there. The next day, the atmosphere on board was different. People were quieter, more cautious. The staff were still trying to maintain their usual cheerful demeanor, but even they seemed a little rattled. The ocean, which had once seemed vast and inviting, now felt oppressive, as if something was lurking just beneath its surface, waiting to rise up. I tried to push the fear aside, to focus on the remaining days of our honeymoon, but every time I looked out at the endless ocean, the unease returned. Something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out here. The ocean had secrets that were waiting to be discovered, and I wasn't sure if we were prepared for what we might find. The next day, the unsettling feeling lingered in the air, like a storm waiting to break. People were quieter than usual, exchanging nervous glances whenever the captain's voice came over the loudspeakers or when the ship passed a stretch of the ocean where the shadow had appeared. Even my wife, who usually had a way of brightening any situation, seemed off. She kept looking over the railing, staring out into the dark water, her brow furrowed as if trying to understand something that was just beyond her grasp. By noon, the ship's crew had begun to notice the tension among the passengers. They did their best to maintain their usual hospitality, but it was clear that something was bothering everyone. The passengers who had been so carefree just days earlier were now huddling in small groups, whispering to one another in hushed tones. I overheard a few people talking about strange dreams they had experienced the previous night, dreams filled with dark water and strange creatures lurking beneath the surface. At lunch, I tried to talk to my wife about what we had seen, the shape in the water, but she brushed it off, saying it was probably just a trick of the light. But her voice lacked conviction, and I could see the doubt in her eyes. I couldn't help but feel like we were all just pretending that everything was fine when we all knew deep down that something wasn't right. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the deck, hoping to clear my head. I needed to shake off the lingering dread that had settled over me, to find some way to rationalize what we had experienced. But as I walked, I saw that the passengers were avoiding the deck railing, as if they were afraid to look out at the ocean. As I reached the back of the ship, I noticed a small group of passengers gathered near the edge, staring out at the water. I walked over to see what they were looking at, my heart pounding. When I reached them, I saw it too. There, just below the surface, was the same shadow moving slowly, its dark form cutting through the water like some massive unseen creature. It wasn't moving in the erratic way a boat would. It was gliding deliberate, as though it knew exactly where it was going. I could see no clear shape, but it was undeniably massive, its presence chilling in the stillness of the ocean. The passengers were frozen in place, staring at the water, and I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't a whale or a ship or any known creature. This was something different, something ancient. I turned to the others and asked, "What do you think it is?" My voice was barely a whisper, but they all looked at me, wide-eyed and silent, unsure whether they had seen what I had seen or if it was all just a trick of the light. But there was no mistaking the fear in their eyes. They had seen it too. A crew member came over to the group, his face tight with concern. He told everyone to move away from the railing and back inside the ship. His tone was urgent, but controlled, as though he had been ordered to keep things quiet. The fear in his voice made it impossible for me to dismiss what I had just witnessed. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was drawing closer, something that had been silently watching us for days. The ship's usual vibrancy had turned into a tense silence. The lights in the hallways flickered, and every creak of the ship seemed amplified in the dark, like a warning from the depths below. I tried to sleep, but the fear kept me awake. I couldn't ignore the strange sound of the ocean anymore. The low, guttural hum that had first echoed through the ship now seemed to pulse beneath my feet, as if the very ocean itself was alive, sending out signals. I got out of bed and walked to the deck again, drawn by an invisible force. The night was pitch black, and the ocean stretched out in every direction, an infinite void. I leaned over the railing, looking out into the blackness. And then, just like before I saw it, the shadow, it was closer now, so close I could almost feel its presence. A mass in the water, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. The sound of the ocean had changed, deepening into a low, vibrating hum that seemed to resonate through my bones. My heart raced, and for a moment I thought I might be imagining it, or that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the shadow seemed to rise from the water, a dark shape breaking the surface in slow, deliberate movements. It wasn't a whale or a ship. It was something else, something that should not have existed in the modern world. I backed away from the railing, my legs trembling. I had to get inside. I had to warn my wife. But when I turned to go back into the ship, I felt the weight of something terrible watching me, something ancient, and it made every step feel heavier, as if I were walking through thick, unseen air. I don't know what it was, or why it had chosen this moment to reveal itself. But one thing was certain, whatever it was not something we were meant to see. It was ancient, deep, and as I stood there, the fear that had once been a whisper grew louder, growing inside me like a terrible realization. We weren't just on a cruise anymore. We were intruders in a world far older than our own, and now whatever had been waiting beneath the water was coming for us. The ship's halls felt more oppressive the next morning, as though the air itself had thickened with unease. I barely slept, my thoughts a mess of dread and unanswered questions. The crew tried to go about their duties as usual, but their faces were tight, their movements stiff. I could tell they were hiding something, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy despite the growing tension among the passengers. At breakfast, I looked around at the other guests. They were quieter than before, their conversations hushed, glances frequently darting toward the windows, as if they too were sensing something unseen just beyond the horizon. My wife noticed the shift in the atmosphere, but she didn't ask me what had happened last night. Instead, she just placed a gentle hand on mine and said, "We should relax today. Let's go explore the ship, enjoy the day." I didn't want to. I wanted to stay inside, away from the water, away from whatever was out there, but I didn't want to worry her. So, I forced a smile and nodded. We spent the next few hours walking around the upper decks, visiting the observation lounges, trying to put our minds at ease. The ship was beautiful, grand, but today it felt like a gilded cage. No matter where I looked, my eyes kept drifting back to the water. The ocean seemed even more endless today, its surface oddly still, like it was holding its breath. Around midday, an announcement came over the loudspeakers. The captain, his voice unnervingly calm, announced that due to unforeseen circumstances, the ship would be altering its course. We'd be taking a detour, and while it was all perfectly normal, they assured us it was for our safety. There would be no changes to our schedule, just a slight alteration to avoid unfavorable conditions. He said it with such confidence, as if everything was fine, but I could hear the slight tremor in his voice. I wasn't the only one who noticed. I turned to my wife, but she had already noticed it too. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ship. We tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered like a shadow. As the day wore on, we couldn't help but notice more and more passengers gathering in groups, whispering, exchanging worried glances. People were talking in hushed voices, speculating, questioning what was really going on. A few had even seen the shadow in the water, just like I had. They didn't know what it was either. The dinner that night was eerily quiet, the usual chatter of passengers subdued. No one seemed hungry, yet they ate mechanically, their eyes darting around nervously. The servers moved through the dining room with forced smiles, but I could tell they were as uneasy as the rest of us. The once cheerful ambience of the cruise had been replaced with an overwhelming sense of tension. After dinner, we went up to the top deck to try and clear our minds. It was a cool evening, the sky darkening with the promise of another night under the stars. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. It wasn't just the shadow I had seen, or the strange hum that had been echoing through the ship. There was something else out there, something far older and darker than anything I could comprehend. As we reached the deck, we saw a small group of passengers gathered near the railing, staring out at the ocean. They didn't speak, but their eyes were wide, fixed on something beyond the ship. We joined them, our hearts racing. Out in the distance, there was a shape much larger than the shadow I had seen before. It was not just an outline in the water. It was a massive, undulating form, moving slowly toward the ship, like a dark leviathan stirring beneath the surface. The water around it rippled, but the thing itself was impossibly still, as if it were waiting. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sight of it, by the realization that whatever this was, it wasn't just some fluke. It had been waiting for us, watching us. I turned to my wife, but she was already looking at me, her face pale, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. She didn't need to say anything. I could see it in her eyes. She knew. Suddenly, the ship jerked violently, throwing everyone off balance. People screamed, and the lights flickered. The ship groaned, as if it were straining under an immense pressure. The strange hum from the water grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the very walls of the ship. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, but his words were incoherent, drowned out by the chaos. The ship's crew scrambled, rushing to maintain control, but the panic was palpable. No one knew what was happening, and no one knew what to do. I grabbed my wife's hand, pulling her toward the interior of the ship. "We need to get inside now," I shouted over the noise, but she was already ahead of me, her eyes fixed on the ocean, unable to tear herself away from the thing that was still moving closer. The dark shape was now enormous, blotting out the stars behind it as it loomed over the water, just beneath the surface, as though it were ready to rise. The lights went out, and for a brief, terrible moment, we were surrounded by total darkness. The only sound was the hum, louder now, almost deafening, and the crashing of waves against the ship's hull. Then, without warning, a violent shake rattled through the ship, and I heard the unmistakable sound of something massive breaking through the surface of the water. We were no longer on a cruise. We were at the mercy of whatever this was, and as the darkness enveloped us, I knew that whatever came next, we were no longer safe. The ocean had claimed us, and we were not meant to leave. The darkness seemed endless, the only sound the chaos around us. People were screaming, their voices mingling with the deep, guttural hum that seemed to be coming from every direction. I could feel the ship trembling beneath my feet as though it was being pulled, dragged, towards something deep below. My heart was racing as I pulled my wife close, trying to shield her from whatever was happening. The panic was spreading quickly. Crew members were running past us, their faces pale, their expressions filled with terror. I tried to shout at them, to get some information, but my voice was drowned out by the overwhelming noise. The walls of the ship groaned and cracked as the entire vessel seemed to shudder under the weight of something massive moving beneath it. The ship lurched again, throwing me and my wife off balance. We stumbled, falling to the floor, as the ship listed violently to one side. The lights flickered again and then cut out completely, plunging us into total darkness. I could hear people running, stumbling over each other in the corridors, their panicked footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Suddenly, the hum intensified, vibrating through the ship's structure. It was as if the very air was charged with a malevolent energy, thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. I could hear a low, rumbling growl, as if something enormous was moving just beneath the surface of the water. I grabbed my wife's hand, pulling her toward the emergency stairs. "We need to get to the lifeboats," I yelled, though I wasn't sure if they were even still an option. I was terrified, but there was no other choice. We couldn't just stay here and wait for whatever it was to take us. As we made our way through the dark corridors, the ship continued to groan and shake, each movement more violent than the last. I heard the sound of metal scraping against metal, followed by an ear-splitting crash. A piercing scream echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of rushing water. The lower levels of the ship were flooding, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the entire vessel sank beneath the waves. "Brian," my wife cried, tugging on my arm. I turned to see her face, pale and wide-eyed with terror. "We have to go," I urged, my voice barely audible over the sounds of chaos. But before we could move, the lights flickered again, casting a brief, eerie glow over the hallway. And that's when I saw it. A figure, dark and indistinct, loomed at the end of the corridor. Its shape was massive, its presence overwhelming, as if it was made from the very darkness that surrounded us. The creature seemed to shimmer and twist, as though it was made from water itself, its form bending and warping in unnatural ways. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were a glowing, sickly green, fixed on us with an intelligence that sent a chill down my spine. I froze. My wife gasped beside me, and for a moment, neither of us could move. The creature didn't approach us, but it didn't have to. Its gaze was enough to make my heart feel as though it was being crushed under some immense weight. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished, melting back into the shadows. I blinked, unable to believe what I had just seen. Had it been real? Was it some kind of hallucination caused by the chaos of the ship's destruction? "We need to move," I urged again, grabbing my wife's arm, and we started running down the hall. The lights were out completely now, and the sound of rushing water grew louder, closer. The ship was sinking and fast. I had no idea how much time we had left, but I knew we couldn't waste it. We finally reached the emergency stairs, only to find the door blocked by debris. Panic surged in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. We turned and ran toward another exit, knowing that if we didn't get out soon, we wouldn't get out at all. As we sprinted toward the deck, I heard the sound of something breaking through the ship. The same growl, now accompanied by a terrifying screech, echoed from deep within the hull. I couldn't bear to imagine what it was. I couldn't. When we reached the deck, I saw what had caused the ship to tremble. The ocean was churning violently, waves crashing against the sides of the vessel, rising higher and higher with every passing second. The ship was listing badly now, leaning dangerously to one side, and it was clear that we were rapidly losing control. I grabbed my wife's hand once more, pulling her toward the lifeboats. But when we reached the lifeboat station, my heart sank. The boats were already gone, launched into the water long before we had even reached the deck. And then I heard it, the same guttural growl, louder now, closer. The water beneath us began to swirl, spinning in a vortex, as if something enormous was rising from the depths. I turned to my wife, my voice hoarse with fear. "We need to jump," I said. "Now!" Before she could respond, the ship lurched violently, throwing us off balance. We were both sent sprawling to the deck, the world spinning around us. I looked up just in time to see the water rising up around us, like a wave of destruction. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I felt a cold, wet hand grip my ankle, pulling me toward the edge of the ship. I screamed, trying to break free, but it was no use. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the monstrous figure rising from the water, its glowing eyes fixed on me. And then, darkness. The next thing I knew, I was awake. The cold air bit into my skin, and the sound of crashing waves was all around me. My head throbbed with a dull, relentless ache, and I tried to push myself up, but the world spun around me, dizzy and disorienting. Where was I? Panic surged through me, and I scrambled to my feet, glancing around. The ship was gone. In its place, there was nothing but endless ocean stretching in every direction. The lifeboat. My wife. Had they been taken by the sea? The memory was fragmented, like pieces of a shattered glass, but I couldn't find the answers. I scanned my surroundings, heart hammering in my chest. It was only then that I noticed the lifeboat I had somehow ended up in. But the boat was damaged, half sunk, and water was steadily filling it. My breath caught in my throat. I reached over the side, feeling the cold, salty water creeping in, and panic surged once again. What happened to the ship? What had happened to everyone else? I looked around desperately, trying to focus. The waves were calming now, though the occasional swell still rocked the lifeboat. There was nothing else in sight, no other ships, no signs of land, just an open expanse of water that seemed to stretch on forever. I sat back in the lifeboat, forcing myself to think. How had I survived? I should have drowned, been pulled under, but I hadn't. I was still here, but for what? The haunting growls, the sight of that creature, those were no hallucinations. Something had been in the water with us. Something ancient and deadly. The water had come alive. Or maybe it was the sea itself that had turned against us. The thought made my skin crawl, and I instinctively pulled my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. I glanced around once more, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. A shadow moved across the water. I froze, my heart leaping in my chest. No. It was just a whale, or maybe a large fish. I tried to convince myself, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The shape that had moved was far too large, far too swift, and it was heading straight toward me. Suddenly, the surface of the water seemed to ripple unnaturally, and the air grew heavy. My mind screamed at me to row, to do anything to escape, but my arms felt leaden, my body too tired to fight. I was numb with fear. I leaned forward, trying to see through the thickening fog that had started to roll in, but it was impossible to make out anything clearly. The water shifted again, and now I could hear it, that guttural growl, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the very depths of the ocean, vibrating through the lifeboat. It was closing in on me. Before I could react, the boat was violently yanked from one side. I was thrown off balance, nearly going overboard. Grabbing the sides of the lifeboat with trembling hands, I barely managed to pull myself back into it. And then as quickly as it had come, the pull stopped. Silence. For a moment everything was still. I sat in a lifeboat, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. The fog thickened around me, and the air felt heavy, suffocating. I could feel a presence now just beneath the surface, watching, waiting. And then with terrifying clarity, I knew. The sea wasn't just the sea anymore. Something had awakened. Something had risen from the depths of the ocean. Something that had been there long before the first ship sailed. It had been waiting for this moment for us, for me, and I had no way of escaping it. A sudden wave of nausea overtook me, but there was no time to react. The sea seemed to boil, the water churning violently beneath me, as if it was preparing to strike. I heard the growl again, but this time it wasn't a distant sound. It was right there, beneath the boat. The creature, whatever it was closing in, and I had nowhere to go. No escape. The lifeboat rocked violently again, and I clung to the sides, my knuckles white from the strain. My mind raced as I tried to think of something, anything, that could save me. But it was too late. A massive shadow rose from the water with terrifying speed, breaking the surface like a giant beast, its enormous form towering above me. Its eyes, glowing a sickly, unnatural green, locked onto mine, and I felt my body go cold with terror. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as the creature drew closer. Its form was like a twisted nightmare, part human, part sea creature. Its skin was slick and dark, slick with the water that seemed to flow off it in unnatural ways. Long tendrils of seaweed clung to its limbs, and its enormous mouth was lined with rows of sharp teeth. I could see the glint of them in the fog, and I felt my heart stop. It was coming for me. Then, in one terrifying motion, the creature reached toward the lifeboat with one massive arm, its fingers closing around the edge. The boat groaned under the weight, and the creature's other hand reached out, pulling me toward its gaping maw. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even think. All I could do was try to hold on as everything around me began to spin. And then darkness.